This is my daughter. The first time I saw her, on the day she was born. In just about any other country or in any other hospital in the United States, she would have been a miscarriage. She was born at 23 weeks, which is just about halfway through pregnancy. It's the very, very limit of human viability outside the womb at the most advanced hospitals in the world. I think in Romania, the limit of viability is somewhere around 25 weeks, if you're lucky. And in most really advanced places, it's maybe 24. So there are very few places that will do anything to save a 23-week-old baby. She was born weighing 570 grams. She was 28 inches long. She was translucent. She looked like a medium rare piece of meat or like an uncooked shrimp. Her eyes were fused shut, and I could see her heart beating through her chest. So the doctors told us that they could try to save her, but we might be better off just letting her die in our arms than to hook her up to all of these things. And no matter what they did, there was an 80% chance that she would die or be seriously disabled for the rest of her life. And I said, "What do you mean disabled?" Actually, they didn't use the word disabled. They used this really horrible word, morbidity, which means disability. But when I think of morbidity, I just see death. And I said, what do you mean morbidity? Like life on a ventilator or asthma? And they said any of those things. She could be damaged to any degree in any pocket of her body or mind, and they had no way to guess which way it might go. So I'd be lying if I told you that between my husband and I, we're both storytellers, that we didn't know that this was a really good story and probably the most powerful story that we would ever have to tell, either one of us. But I didn't care about stories then. I didn't care if I ever wrote one or edited one or read another story in my life. I couldn't remember the person I was when I cared about stories. I couldn't remember how I had defined myself before this happened. All I could think about was that my baby had been ripped out of my body, and how was I going to put her back in? And I thought, if she doesn't live, I won't either. So I wasn't thinking about stories. But the first phone call I made was to my editor, who was my best friend. And I called him because I asked him to send a photographer. Not because I thought this picture was going to be plastered over the front page of the paper and eventually, on billboards or whatever, but because I didn't know if she would live long enough for my husband to go home and get the camera. So this is the first, this is my husband Tom and I, the first time I saw her, and we were in this, I'll try to set the scene for you a little bit. We were in this strange place, and babies were dying all around us, and it became clear right away what the stakes were. Babies were dying, and people would run out wailing and crying, and they would wrap the babies in blankets, and they would leave them in the incubators, sometimes for hours, until someone came to get them and take them to the morgue. So I had a lot of time to think about when they were going to come for us. And so in those hours and days, I didn't do anything right as a mother, and certainly not as a storyteller. I didn't take any notes. I didn't ask any good questions. I just kind of cried a lot. And I said all of the wrong things, and I was terrified of my daughter and of all of the ways I was screwing everything up. I don't know what neonatal intensive care units look like here, but this is the place where my daughter went. And this is 5 minutes from my house, which was an unbelievable stroke of very good luck. This is All Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida. But it looks like, to me, it looks like one of those alien hives, like where they grow alien babies in space. All of this equipment is built to replicate a human womb. And as I started to think about it, I just found that incredible. And there's something really eerie about the place that for a long time I couldn't put my finger on. And Jackie was talking about listening. And what was weird about the place is that no babies cry there. There are 98 babies in there, and none of them make a sound. And it's because they have ventilators in their throat, or they're doped up and they can't cry. So you just hear this beeping and alarming, and you get kind of numb to it. But we were in this place for 6.5 months, and day and night, and I didn't brush my teeth or wear a bra or shower or anything. I just was there. And we started to realize that we were at this secret world that's at the heart of the healthcare debate in the United States, and where the most pressing ethical questions are not theoretical. And the questions that they have to ask and answer every day is who deserves to live and at what cost? And how hard are we going to try to save these babies? And at what point are we doing more harm than good? And my husband and I had to address those questions. What if her brain starts to bleed? Will we take her off the ventilator? What if at one point her intestines tore and she had to have a bunch of surgeries? So at what point is it too much? This is the first time I held her. She's 2 weeks old. I won't make you wait to find out if she lived. I mean, she did. But I didn't decide to write about this until she came home. And you might think that it would be easy because I'm a writer and I lived through it and it all unfolded in front of me. But the person who went through this was basically mentally impaired. It would be like trying to write about something that happened to you 6 months ago when you were drunk and a bear was chasing you. There was too many stress hormones, too much fear. I didn't have any notes. My husband had taken a few notes, and he said that he took notes because it was like a defense mechanism for him. He needed to kind of withdraw from the situation. So he would go into reporter face, and he would get a notebook out, and he would write down what the nurses were wearing and what the ventilator settings were. But I wish I could show you a page of these notes because these are the worst handwriting of any human, and he writes in shorthand. So I still don't know what his notes say. On top of that, I'd been editing, and I hadn't written a story about anything in 7 years. So I didn't know if I remembered how to do it. But I was like, well, I'm an editor. I should be able to talk about character and action and focus and story engine. But the things that were really easy for me as an editor became incredibly difficult when it was my own story. And my biggest thing that I knew was I did not want to make this story personal. So when I proposed it, I said, this is a science story. This is an explanatory piece of journalism. And then blah, 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 blah. And my editor was just kind of looking at me like, uh-huh. But I was really afraid that it was going to be indulgent and sentimental and be like one of those made-for-TV movies, or something you might read in a greeting card. So I started asking myself the questions I asked my reporters. So what's the story really about? Can you say it in one word? And my word was frontier. I said, this is a story about a frontier between viability and futility, and between life and death, and between science and faith and luck. And I said, well, okay, who's the main character? And then I freaked out. And I started I was sitting on my bed, and I had my laptop in my lap, and my husband was there, and I was typing, and I was like, I can't write this story. I don't even know who the main character is. I mean, obviously it's the baby, right? Because what I learned in graduate school was in a narrative story, a sympathetic character confronts a problem, They struggle to overcome it, and they either succeed or fail. I failed narrative journalism in college, but I remember that much. So clearly the baby is a sympathetic character, right? But she can't do anything. She's like laying in a box, and you can't interview her, and she can't talk, and how much control does she have over her situation? So it's not the baby. Well, I really didn't want it to be me, because I'm very uncomfortable with personal stuff. Like, I didn't put my ultrasounds on Facebook. Half my family didn't know that I had done in vitro fertilization or that Juniper was conceived with the egg of a donor. This would be news to my father, my sister, most of my friends. I had never written in the first person before at all. So I said, the main character is definitely not me, because all I did was sit by the side of the incubator and cry a lot. So I didn't have any control over what happened in the story either. And I'm telling my husband this, and he's like, you're stupid. Shut up. And I was like, ah. And he starts talking, and if any of you have ever seen Tom talk or know him, he's so sensitive and smart. And he said something like, you willed this baby into existence, and you fought for her, and you dragged my sorry ass, kicking and screaming, to the altar and to the fertility clinic, and you carried her in your body, even when your body was trying to spit her out, and you held her in there as long as you could, and then when she came out, and she was looking so alien and incomplete and raw, you didn't run. And you pumped all this milk, and you rejected the pain medicine so that it wouldn't get into her body. And you sat by her, and you talked to her, and read to her, and sang to her, and made sure that she knew that she was not alone. And you made yourself a mother by doing all of the little thankless things that mothers do. So of course you're the main character. I was like, oh. And I had my laptop in my lap, so I was like typing all this, because I was like, this is good shit. I'm like typing. Because I'm just seeing, like, this is going to be in the story. But of course what he did then, like, I'm thinking, I'm so smart for marrying this man, because he's so sweet and sensitive, and he really knows how to tell a story. But he screwed it up, of course, because he kept talking. And this is what he said. I just want some credit at some fucking point when you're on Oprah or whatever, and you become the symbol of motherhood. I want you to look into the camera and say, my husband is the one who helped me see what I have done. Will you do that? Will you fucking do that? So now what I do, of course, is I tell everybody that story. This is, when your baby lives in a plastic box, you're desperate for any opportunity to interact with her in any way. So we would be able to hold her when they weighed her. And we would like each want to do it. So the nurses were really nice, and they would always say out after the first attempt that can't be the right weight. I think we need to do it again, so that Tom and I wouldn't physically fight at the incubator. But so the story is in this photo. It's how do you connect with a baby in this brave new world kind of environment? And I don't like to write in cliches, and I don't like to even talk in cliches, so I don't want to say that this is a story about the healing power of love. But of course that's what it is. And even after I wrote the story, my husband was like, did you even use the word love? Like, do you want to go back and see if you can get that in? But I'm so scared of being a cliche that I don't think I even put it in the story. But recognizing what your story is about is really hard with personal stories, and I work with a lot of writers who want to write about very personal and sometimes very difficult things, and often they'll phrase it as a journey. I want to write about my fertility journey, or like, I want to write about my cancer journey, or I want to write about my journey out of addiction. And whenever I hear the word journey, I'm just like, ah! as an editor because those stories are so hard to do. It's like the writing can be very therapeutic and healing, but writing that is done for therapy should almost never be read. It's like anything that I wrote when I was 14 was probably very useful to me at the time, but that shit should be burned and never see the light of day. So that's what I was scared of. And for these stories to work, they need to be about something that's new or surprising or different. It can't just be the plucky kid with cancer. Before I did this story, I was very jaded about a lot of things. And we would call those stories disease of the week. Like the child that shows resilience in the face of the rare disease. And I was like, oh my God, I can't write a disease of the week story. But I thought there was something here that I hadn't seen before, that I hadn't read before. And to make the story authentic, I had to protect what was special about it by not letting it turn into a formula or a cliche. One great thing about writing about your baby is that if you have to talk about your story, you can just have baby pictures. And people will go, oh. So I have nothing to say about this except, oh. But I have this other huge problem, which is that I have a terrible memory. Always have. And I already explained to you that I didn't write anything down. So I was reading other things that people had written, like other pre-me memoirs, and there was something about them that felt inauthentic to me. They felt a little bit too smooth, a little bit too perfect, a little bit too made-for-TV movie. And so as I went down to write my story, I realized I couldn't remember any of it. And I thought that was a huge problem. But then I realized maybe I could turn it into a strength. So I just started out doing the only thing I knew how to do, which was to report this story like I would report a story about anybody else, like forgetting for a second that it was about me. So the first thing I do is I go to the documents, right? So I called the hospital and I said, I'd like to request my daughter's medical chart. And they said, sure. Come pick it up. So I went to the hospital and they're like, park out, just pull up to the loading dock. I was like, what do you mean the loading dock? And they brought it out on this giant cart in these huge boxes. And it was 7,000 pages, for which they normally charge $1 a page, but they waived that. And I couldn't even read it all. I had to hire a high school student to read the 7,000 page chart and put Post-it notes on all the interesting parts. And then I had to go and I started calling experts. So I'm like, well, let me get some statistics. Well, there are no statistics on 23-week babies because there aren't enough of them. So when I went to the statistics, they were all for like 28-week babies and below. Well, those are useless to me. So I had to sort of find my own statistics by calling a statistician at Harvard and getting birth certificate data, and he crunched some stuff and he gave me some statistics. And then called an economist and I called an ethicist who actually totally changed how I felt about what had happened to me and my baby and everything. And that was really useful, but at a certain point I realized that I was doing all of these things to distract myself from the really hard work of writing about the personal stuff. So I started interviewing the doctors and nurses and like working my way into the heart of the story. And when I would do these interviews, it was really weird because they all started out with, thank you for saving my baby's life. And then I would have to go into like reporter face and like ask questions. And then they would tell me something that I had never known about my daughter, about what had happened to me. And I'd go, oh, really? You know, and I would be like mom again for a second. Then I would go back into reporter face. But I learned all of these things about, like, that she was much closer to the edge than I ever knew. That photo I showed you from the first time I held her, at the time they said, well, we're going to let you hold her because it's Tuesday, and we always change out the incubators on Tuesday, so we have to move her, so here, just hold her while we move her. And they said, in the interviews, they said, no, we let you hold her because we thought she was about to die, and we feel that every mom should get to hold her baby once while it's still alive. And then I found out from a girl who's works as a nurse's assistant that on several, they have this place called the dead baby closet. And it's not a closet full of dead babies, but that's what it sounds like. But the dead baby closet is a place where they keep these handmade boxes. And when your baby dies, they give you this box. And in the box is a really nice outfit and a handprint kit and a lock of hair. And you can wash your baby and dress it in this outfit and take its handprints and footprints. And that's what you get to keep when your baby dies. And she said, on 2 or 3 occasions, they had me go get a box out of the closet for you just in case. I was like, And then we had this doctor named Dr. Shaquille who was terrifying. And she was really intense and stern, and a lot of the nurses hated her. And they called her Terror Doc. And she was always really nice to me. And I learned that the reason she was nice to me is because she has a real soft spot for moms. Because when her son was 18 months old, he was in the hospital. So when I was interviewing her, she told me the story. And she also told me that she prays in the hospital. She's Muslim, and she prays, 5 times a day. And that there was this really key moment in the story when my daughter was dying. And she had hours left. And Dr. Shaquille had to decide whether to send her into surgery and try to save her or just let her go. And the surgeon didn't want to operate because the surgeon told me that they have a saying, never operate on a patient on the day of their death, because if they die, then it'll be your fault, and they would have died anyway. And that was what the surgeon was telling the doctor. It's I'm not cutting this baby open because there's no chance. And Dr. Shaquille told me that she looked into the incubator, and Juniper's eyes had just opened, and the baby was looking at her, and she was saying, I'm still here. And that's when she made the decision to send her into surgery that saved her life. And she said that while Juniper was in the operating room, she went into another little room next to the NICU and got on her prayer rug and was down on her knees asking God for help. So I wrote all this up. And I turned in my draft, and my editor, who's my friend, said something really profane, which meant that he really liked it. And I was like, woo! And then he got back to me, and he said, actually, you're holding back. He said, if I didn't know you, I could read this story and have no sense of you at all. It's not personal enough. And you need to put yourself into the story more. And I was like, Mike, are you going to make me write about my boobs? And he's like, I'm not telling you what's right. He's like, but you need to get yourself into the story. And I was like, right, but how much? Boobs or He's like, just go figure it out. So of course day 2 starts with my boobs. And I just decided that, I thought back about myself in that time, and it was a person that I didn't want to acknowledge. I was not this noble symbol of motherhood that, never lost faith in my daughter and always believed that she would thrive and was there for her all the time. I was a complete wreck. I was crying all the time. There was many days when I couldn't force myself out of bed to go in and be with her. So Tom went, often with cookies in hand, and when he got home, I would chew him out. And I'd be like, how's that campaign going for Father of the Year? And I'm ashamed of the person that I was in that time. But if I was going to write about it, I had to put that stuff in, or the story would not feel true. It would feel like all those other memoirs that I read. So I made a decision, and the decision was that I was going to put everything in and hope that my editor, Mike, had the good sense to take it out if I went too far. So she was so little that when she could finally wear clothes after a few months, there were no baby clothes that fit. So we had this nurse named Tracy, and Tracy went to the pet store. And she bought the smallest dog clothes you could buy. She bought like extra, extra small Chihuahua clothes. And we would come in, and our baby would be like dressed. She would like do the whole sort of diorama of the incubator too. She wouldn't just dress the baby. One time we came in and Juniper was wearing a bikini and there was like a beach ball. And she'll do this like, she dressed one baby up as a prize fighter and put like boxing ropes around the outside. She dressed one baby up as a Chippendale dancer with like a little Dollar Bill in his diaper. So, and I was on this idea of authenticity. I thought, people are going to think that's really weird. And I put that in the story. Like, your baby's on the edge of death, and you're dressing it up like a clown, in dog clothes. But real life is never all horrible, or all wonderful, or all anything. And for it to feel authentic, I had to put all this stuff in. This is what makes it true. And also, if we didn't have this, let's face it, this story would be a real downer. I mean, this was getting depressing before I put this up there. So what really happened was that sometimes it was funny, and sometimes we laughed about it. And that was a gift in the story. And this is Tracy. And Tracy was a gift, too, as a character. At first, I was really scared of having to write about Tracy because she's not an easy read. She's over the years really perfected the non-expressive face. And she has a trick that she does where if she doesn't want you to see what she's thinking, she puts a surgical mask over her face. And sometimes it's because she has really bad news for you, or she's sad. And sometimes it's because there's some really bad parents across the hall, and she's like making fun of them, or she's horrified by them, and so she'll put the mask on. So I was like, how am I going to get Tracy to open up? And what I did was a Jackie tip, as I said, Tracy, do you have any photos? It was like our third interview. I had nothing from her. Oh yeah, and she brought out the photo albums of like the babies dressed up in all these crazy get-ups, and she's started talking about the babies, and this is I went to this baby's funeral, and this is what it was like, and this baby lived for 8 months and died anyway, and this baby's parents abandoned him, and so I held him while he died, and this baby I took to the park on his first birthday and pushed him on a swing. And this one just graduated from high school, but it's not real high school. It's like, special high school, and she's 23, but still, look, 23 years ago, we didn't save a lot of these babies. And all these stories started pouring out of Tracy because of the photo album. And she told me all these great details, like how that when the babies when they lay in the incubator, their heads get squished into like a funny shape, and they call it toaster head. And you can see toaster heads anywhere once you know to look for it. And I'll be walking through Target, and I'll be like, preemie, toaster head. And when they don't want to say that a baby is like really sick or dying, they call them bad babies. Like, my baby's not behaving today. My baby's a bad baby. And all of those things were such gifts because she's not sappy, and she's not sentimental, and she's not a cartoon character. She's a real person with complicated thoughts and a really kind of sick way of looking at the world that somehow was a really good fit for me and for my story. This is the terror doctor. You can see it, right? That nurse is like, she would like walk through the unit, and everyone would be. She'd have this posse of people around her, and they would all just be like looking up at her, like afraid to speak. So I wrote the story, and I made it. She was a pretty major character. And I felt like we'd had a good interview, but I also had that funny feeling in my stomach, like at the end of an interview, where you think, they don't know what this is going to be like when this gets published. They don't know how this is going to read in the paper. And I knew that she just struck me as a very private person who was going to have a hard time with this. But I always take my stories and check them with the people who are in them. So I took all the parts of the story that were about science or medicine or any of that kind of stuff. And I took them to all the doctors and nurses and people, and I had everybody check all my facts. And so that's how I started with her, just checking all my facts. And by then, they'd been checked by like 8 people, so I knew they were tight. But I wanted to start with something easy for her. So she goes through and she's like, yeah, that's good, that's good, that's good, that's all right. Yeah, it looks really good, looks really good. And then she gets to the part about her and about her praying, and she says, do not put that in the paper. I'm like, oh God. But I wasn't asking her for permission. But I wanted to have the conversation before the story came out and not after. So I started talking, and I heard myself telling her all these things about how this is not just an explanatory scientific story about a frontier in medicine. And it's not just a story about ethics or technology. It's a story about human beings. And at every critical point in this baby's life, it was a human being who made a decision or saw something that the monitors and the machines didn't see. And those were the moments that made the difference. And I said, I've got to have, the part about you praying is really important because it's a story about how people took science and technology and medicine, and they did everything they could with them, but it took something else to save this baby. And she thought about it for a second, and she goes, well, why didn't you write that then? Oh, Jesus. And I just tried not to choke or cry, and I said, didn't I? And we talked about it, and I realized I hadn't. I had kind of been a little bit clumsy with what she told me. I'd been so worried about my own crap that I hadn't taken the time to really set up her stuff. And I hadn't remembered for a second that, scary as it was for me to put all my personal stuff into the story, it was also really scary for her. She was afraid that the people at the hospital who saw only this really stern exterior were going to make fun of her. She was afraid that she would somehow stand in for all Muslims in the story. And I said, no, look, 2 paragraphs above you, there's 400 Muslims in India praying, so you're only the 401st Muslim in the story. And she laughed about that. And then she started to tell me more about how she prays and why and about her faith. And she started giving me more and more and more and better stuff. And she made the story better. And I rewrote it. And I went back to her and I sat down with her again and I handed it to her. And she said, thank you. She said, I'm honored to be in your story. I'm honored to be part of it. And after the story came out, she emailed me and she said, thank you again. And I said, well, why? And she said, well, my husband and my son had no idea what I did for a living. I want to wrap up, but the question I always get is how's Juniper doing? So I just wanted to. She's doing, she's like, the nurses at the hospital are really superstitious, and there's a lot of things they won't say. They won't use the word home. They call it the H word. Because inevitably, if they start telling someone that their baby's going to go home, the baby will, their heart will stop the next day. And I've inherited a lot of that, so I'll never say that my baby's perfectly fine. But she's 3 years old. She's in preschool. She's meeting every developmental milestone, and she always has, except for she sucks at puzzles. No, my husband really sucks at puzzles too, so I think that might have something to do with it. So, because of the terrible handwriting, it's the fine motor thing. So I don't know if it's genetic or preemie or what, but she goes to therapy for that. She talks a mile a minute, She's incredibly independent and crazy and kind of wild. She's the smallest kid in her preschool by like 12 inches. She only weighs 25 pounds. She's 3 years old. She wears like 18-month size clothes for 3 years old. The other day, she comes yelling, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy, I wiped my butt all by myself. I cleaned my butt all by myself." And I'm like, "That's awesome, Junebug." And I turn around and she's holding my toothbrush. So that's my baby. Thank you.